Hey guys, welcome back to Thinking Shooter. On this episode, we're going to find out exactly what distance should you zero your red dot pistol. I'm Levi with the Thinking Shooter. Like I said in the introduction, guys, we're going to be talking about what distance should you zero your red dot pistol at. Before we get going too far, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below to follow for more content in the future. Today we're going to be shooting the FN 509 Tactical with the Holosun 507 Charlie X2. The way this is going to work, we're going to zero at 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25 yards and then shoot a group at each of those same distances with each zero setting to see how the shots correspond with the different distances. We've already zeroed the pistol at 5. I'm not looking for like a super tight group, I'm just looking for center mass grouping and see where this goes here. So let's take a look at the results from the 5-yard zero. I'd like to point out that again, I am just going for center mass-ish groupings today. I just want to get the gist of where the groups are hitting for comparison purposes. Today is also the first time I am shooting this particular pistol. Admittedly, I should have spent some more time behind it before doing this video, as it definitely wasn't my best shooting, but whatever. As you can see, the further in distance we got, the higher the impact from the bullets started to go as well. The 10-yard grouping was closest in elevation to center. The 15-yard was a little higher than that, then the 20-yard started hitting in the outer white ring. Once we hit 25 yards, it wasn't even within the rings anymore. It was barely still on paper up in the top left-hand corner. Let's analyze the 10-yard zero target. Stupid me didn't replace the target after zero, so there is still a bunch of bullet holes in the target that we now have to decipher what was zero and what was testing. Luckily, with the target footage, you can still see where the impacts were at the different distances. If you look towards the bottom of the red center, that's where most of the 5-yard impacts occurred. Everything else, 15 yards and up, were starting to hit a little higher, and they were climbing as you watched the impacts in the target footage. A few were low, and one went way up high where I threw a shot. But now things are starting to stay within the black circle. So far it looks like the 10-yard zero might be a pretty decent place to zero your pistol red dot.
Okay.
Alright, the 15-yard zero target. I wasn't quite settling in for each shot like I should have for the 20-yard grouping, so I ended up throwing like 4 of the 5 shots. Because of this, we aren't really going to take that group into account. If you look at the rest of it, everything is starting to really settle into the center of the target. A couple of my 25-yard shots were thrown, but aside from that, if you look at the focal point of where the impacts are occurring, everything is starting to come towards the heart of the target. Right now, I'm really liking how the 15-yard zero is looking. Okay, the 20-yard zero target. I'm still throwing some shots, but you can tell by now I'm starting to get a lot more comfortable with the pistol. The groups are starting to tighten up quite a bit and are staying a lot more centered. If you look, everything from 5, 10, and 15 yards is now shooting low, which is as to be expected with the 20-yard zero, so keep that in mind. Other than that, for the most part, everything is staying within the black ring. So the 25-yard zero target. Everything is staying within the black ring with only a few shots outside. Now everything is shooting significantly lower. Depending on your accuracy requirements, now is where you really need to start taking holdover into account if you want to shoot at anything closer. Let's talk about the ballistic data behind today's testing. During the testing, I was shooting 9mm 124 grain full metal jacket running at about 1120 feet per second. Zeroed at 5 yards, we were shooting about 1.3 inches high at 10 yards, 2.5 inches high at 15 yards, 3.75 inches at 20 yards, and almost 5 inches high at 25 yards. If you look back at the results during the 5-yard testing, you can see this follows suit pretty well when you take into account any shooter error and environmental factors as the groupings steadily rose throughout the course of the test firing. With the 10-yard zero, we sit at about 3/4 inch low at 5 yards, just over ½ inch high at 15 yards, and a little over 1 inch high at 20 yards, and a bit over 1.5 inch at 25 yards. Again, this follows suit when taking into account any shooter error and environmental factors. All of the groupings, for the most part, stayed within the black circle and were a lot closer to the center than the 5-yard groupings. The 15-yard zero has us at almost 1 inch low at 5 yards, just under a ½ inch low at 10 yards, just over 1/4 inch at 20 yards, and just over a ½ inch at 25 yards. If you remember back to the 15-yard testing, I pointed out that I really like how this zero is turning out because all of the groups were staying much closer to center line and well within margin of shooter error. Based on the ballistic data, it backs up why this zero turned out so well. For 20-yard zero, we sit at 1 inch low at 5 yards, about a ½ inch low at 10 yards, 1/4 inch low at 15 yards, and almost a 1/4 inch high at 25 yards. This can be seen during the target footage for 20 yards, where for the most part, everything was shooting a little low with 25 yards being just a touch high. I think 20 yards would also be a viable option for zero as your max low is 1 inch and your max high is a 1/4 inch, so it is very similar to the 15-yard zero, with almost the same max low, but your max high has more wiggle room than your 15-yard zero. The 25-yard zero is almost identical to the 20-yard zero, with everything shooting low at almost the same impact locations. At 5 yards, we are shooting 1 inch low, between a half and 3/4 inch low at 10 yards, between a 1/4 and a half inch low at 15 yards, and less than a 1/4 inch low at 20 yards. Keeping in mind the margin of shooter error and external factors, there is no difference between a 20-yard and a 25-yard zero in a practical sense. Here is a comparison chart so you can see all of the data right beside each other. Keep in mind that all of this data is based off mathematical formulations and that it is all theory until tested. Based on today's testing, I would say that all of the data I have presented to you does follow along accordingly with the results we have achieved. Obviously, you have to take into account shooter error, but I feel it still was a very good representation of data on paper being transcribed into holes on target. When you are deciding what zero distance you should be going for, the biggest factor you need to take into account is what distance are you most likely going to be shooting from. If you find you will primarily be shooting from 5 yards, then 0 at 5. If you will primarily be shooting at 25 yards, then 0 at 25. While it is true that there are certain situations that have occurred that required the shooter to engage from distances greater than 25 yards, statistically, most engagements will be 25 yards and in. I strongly encourage you to practice at those greater distances, but be realistic with your zero. As for me, based on the ballistic data and the results I got from testing today, I will be zeroing from 15 yards, as it appears to give a really good midpoint out to 25 yards that puts me relatively center mass of what I am aiming at. I encourage you to try out this testing for yourself, but in the event that you just want to take my word for it, hopefully everything I presented gives you guys the confidence to know whatever zero distance you choose will be the right one for you. My final word of advice is to bag your gun during zeroing with sandbags, a pistol rest with soft pads, a backpack, just something that isn't too hard but will give you the stability necessary to shoot the best groups you can, but don't be OCD about your groupings, as they don't have to be perfect. After all of this is said and done, practice.
Hey guys, so that concludes our pistol dot testing from 5 to 25 yards. I'd like to give a very special thank you to my camera crew that helped make all this stuff possible. And I'd like to give a very special thank you to the Bowens for letting me come out here on their property and shoot. But as you can see guys, that's the results from today's testing. I hope you guys learned something. As always, make sure you hit that like, subscribe button down below and make it make sense. Later.